Okay, so Catherine Lee, what a pleasure to have you here. Paul and I have been so excited. We know the depth and calibre of who you are and some of the extraordinary things, in my view, you model and achieve and have been on such an interesting life journey. So I could speak to some of the beautiful historical parts of your career and your personal and professional journey, but might I start by just inviting you to talk a little bit about the 10, 20, 30 years, maybe 20 for you, of the journey of graduating and achieving and raising the family, and just a little bit about you, my friend, please.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me, Peter and Paul. And yeah, please don't make me older than I am. But yeah, it is crazy to think that I have sort of been in the workforce for 20 years now and adulting for 20 years. And sometimes I have to remind myself that I'm still the adult in the family, or one of the adults in the family. So yes, I am a communications professional. I've done sort of a really diverse range of different roles throughout my career, and I've been really fortunate to kind of work across Australia and the UK and do lots of kind of global and Asia Pac projects as well. And now I find myself on the Gold Coast, and I'm married and have two very young children. So that's really been my kind of focus over the last 5 years or so. And I'm back working in consulting, which is where I started my career, in a boutique consultancy. And yeah, it's been kind of interesting, the role that I've stepped into, and I can kind of reflect on my whole career and all the different roles I've done and how it's kind of prepared me for what I'm doing today. And then I've got a little bit of a side hustle. So I'm a really passionate creative writer, and a lot of my role is writing comms, but more for, B2B and corporate communications these days. So I've started children's book writing, and that was kind of inspired accidentally when I was doing a puppet show for my daughter when she was very, very small in the bouncer. And you kind of have to make the stories a little bit more interesting for your own kind of stimulation as much as theirs. And that kind of puppet show inspired my first book, and it's something that I'm just doing really for joy. But we'll continue to do, when I find the time.
Yeah, and part of the magic in the way you show up is the things you do it so well that there's always an uplift and a momentum that goes with it. So that book series, The Lonely Cassowary, I love it. I bought a box full to give to kids and youngsters that I encounter. And even though it's a beautiful illustrated book for kids, there's some depth of meaning and a bit of allegory, metaphor in it. And that's one of your special characteristics, I think, Kat. Yeah. So can we jump into, you're in your early 20s probably. You've got your comms degree and a few things.
Where did you get the comms degree?
So the Queensland University of Technology. So I grew up in Cairns and then moved to what then was like the big smoke. So I left home at 17 and, I wanted to go to uni in Brisbane, and QUT was where it was at. And I think is where it's still at for PR and comms. And look, I remember flipping through the book, because back in the day you flipped through this huge book, and I knew like what I loved, and it was sort of a toss up between teaching and journalism. And then I came across PR and marketing and didn't really understand properly what it was, and none of the careers guidance counsellors in Cairns did. But I looked at all of the kind of requirements and qualities needed for the role, and I thought, that sounds fun, and it sounds like you could go in many different directions. So I just sort of popped that on the list, and was fortunate to get in. So I moved to Brisbane, and I think very lucky that I loved my degree. I met some really great people, and I'm still working in it today, and it's changed so much, but I think the kind of core principles of what I do is still the same, even as like there's rapid technological change, and there has been throughout my whole career. So yeah, I worked the first few years in Brisbane, and I was at a small marketing and communication consultancy then, and I look back and I didn't know at the time how lucky I was with the few leaders there that really did support me and nurture me. And it was really tough. There's one thing about my industry, it's not 9 to 5, and I've always worked incredibly hard, but I got to work on really cool projects. So like the Brisbane International Film Festival, and at that time I was working with lots of restaurants groups. So it was really that consumer PR, and I absolutely loved the film festival, and I got, to do a lot of publicity, but also the marketing and all of the events. And I worked on that for 4 years because I did an internship which led to my job there. And I stayed until I decided I wanted to go over to London. So my dad was British and I had the passport, and my boyfriend at the time wanted to do the same thing.
Is this from when you were a little girl, you had this idea that you were going to go to London one day, or is it something that happened once you were already in the workforce where you're like, oh, there's opportunities afar? Like, how early did that idea come into you?
Oh, not that early, because I remember my dad sitting with me when I was about 15. So I was a teenage cat, and he said, I want to organise your British passport because there's a whole world out there and I want you to experience it. And one day you might want to do this. And I remember probably being a surly teenager and thinking, like, why would I want to do that? No, that's a stupid idea. But like, whatever, you do it and I'll get the passport. Because Dad was, I think, thinking the rules could change at any time. So let's get this locked in. Because I've always loved to travel. And then I think it was just probably working and thinking, yeah, there would be some great opportunities overseas, but the intention was to go for a couple of years, and it was more about the travel and the experience. And yeah, I'll get a job because, you need to make a living. And that'll be exciting. But everyone was sort of, not my family, but the workplace I was at the time, they were kind of warning me against it because it was the global economic crisis, and everyone was saying, there's no jobs, like you won't get a job. This is a ridiculous decision. Don't leave. Like, you're doing so well here, stay here. But that didn't deter me. I thought, I've only got to get one job, and and I've got enough kind of money saved that I can last for a few months and it'll all work out. Like, I think I've always had that mentality of like, it'll all work out, and I'll work really, really hard to get a job. I'll go above and beyond, which I absolutely did. And
this is what you and I often call the inner spirit calling you, right? You just knew intrinsically, I'll find the way. And the reason was strong enough that you wanted to back your own ability and have a crack.
But you obviously had evidence where following that voice had worked out for you. So when you moved from Cairns to Brisbane to go to uni, like obviously that's the same sort of calling. And like there would have been some fear and trepidation just in that, moving away from your family for the first time. But just going with it and trusting with it, did that work out like straight away in the same way that you moved to London did?
Yeah, I think so. I was really lucky in that Mum is part of a big family, and most of her family were in Brisbane, and we'd always travelled to Brisbane, and I absolutely loved it. So I moved in with my auntie for the first couple of years, which was fantastic. So, but it was a big step. Like I like just silly things. Like I remember in the middle of winter, walking to uni with like my short skirt on and my thongs, and calling Mum and being like, I'm freezing cold, and Mum saying like, what are you wearing? And like, just, the naivety and, the driving in Brisbane was a huge thing for me, and like learning how to use a Refidex, because in Cairns, you just know where everything is. And my job was just this huge job. I had so much opportunity, and, I had to put myself in uncomfortable situations all the time. So I guess I had that for a few years. But the move to London was big, like even just navigating. It was very chicken and egg how to open a bank account, because you had to have the job, and I didn't have the job. And there was just so many processes to navigate. And I was pretty young. And so I think, you learn that resilience. And I think probably I'd had that already. And my dad was very, very encouraging. Mum was a bit more cautious, but Dad was like, you can do this. And I think, there was that security in going over with my boyfriend at the time, who was probably a lot more street smart than me. But sometimes that ignorance is bliss as well. And you just throw yourself into something and you do work it out. And, certainly when I landed my first job in London at, what was an incredible agency, but it was so hard. And I remember a few calls back home to my dad crying and saying, I don't think I can do this. And him saying, stick it out for 6 months and see how you're feeling. You just have to put your head down. And that was very much the advice. And it was always, put things into perspective, and you've done really well to get this job, and you're probably doing better than you think. And then by the end of the 6 months, I was loving it and I was thriving, but it wasn't like it all just worked out instantly. It was difficult because I didn't know the market and the expectations were so huge.
So did that feel like a whole other level from what you were doing in Brisbane?
Yeah, it did. Because I went from like a very small agency that it was really hard work, but it still had this family feel. And gosh, they taught me well. And I think they're very formative years of your career. But then I went to London and I worked for, they were a global agency and they were award winning, and I got thrown on all of these accounts, and I got the job by emailing the MD, with the bespoke email and meeting him. And because people like recruiters were hopeless. They just weren't, they were like, you don't know the market. I was like, I can learn the market. I mean, and they were very dubious about, what kind of experience I would have had in Australia. So they really gave me a shot. I think maybe I was on like a 1-month trial, and yeah, it was really hard work to get up to speed. And I think I put a lot of pressure on myself.
What you're also talking about is stepping into your next level of identity, right?
Yeah.
And you probably didn't have the language for it, but you're intrinsically doing it.
Yeah.
And am I correct remembering your history that over a period of time in London, you really took off on the corporate ladder and ended up senior person in News Corp? Was that where all that happened?
Yeah, well, in the UK, like I worked for a couple of different agencies through the 6 years I was there. So I was 4 years at that first agency and then 2 years at the next. And yeah, I did really climb the career ladder. I mean, that was through kind of many 12-hour days and weekend work. And I guess they were the years where I was happy to invest. I didn't even think about it. Work was everything, as was like family and friends. And my family was, but they were obviously overseas. So I was just seeing them for kind of annual holidays. But I guess all of my energy was going into work, and then on the weekends, prioritizing friendships and still having a great time. So it was like very much work hard, play hard, but I think I was really rewarded for that work. So I got the recognition. I got to travel all over the world because we were doing all of these global events. So, but I definitely did not know how to recognize the signs of burnout. So, I realized after kind of my first few roles that like I was leaving when I was completely burnt out, and I wasn't really managing that very well. And that was partly the role and the expectation. And I wasn't the only person in that boat, but I didn't have probably the self-awareness, silly enough, but I didn't have the tools to have those difficult conversations and to say, hey, this is too much now. I would just sort of walk into a room and break down eventually. And then I realized like I needed to make some changes, but I think that was just probably maturity and getting a bit more experienced and a little bit more confident in those situations. So
boundaries, you got stronger.
Yeah, they got stronger, but like it's still probably something that I will always have to work on, those boundaries, but they got much, much stronger. And by the time I went to the second agency, I still worked incredibly hard. But I was probably better at that point at the boundary setting and being like, I'm going to make these commitments and I'm going to leave at this time and actually follow through on that rather than following through for a couple of weeks and then reverting back.
So powerful, your journey. So can we zoom out a bit? The leadership part of it, right? So you're exposed to different leadership models, different sort of mentoring influences. Your dad, obviously, a very powerful mentoring influence on you as well. So leader for us, as you know, Kat, isn't just who's the CEO. It's who are the people of substance and depth using personal power to step into the next level of potential and create an ecosystem. Mm-hmm. But because you had a taste of some pretty challenging senior corporate culture in London and back in Sydney, probably similar type roles. When I think you came back to Sydney after that?
I did, yeah. And I did step back into consulting again, sort of for 18 months. And then I could kind of see, I was sort of one step away from, I guess, stepping into a very senior position. And I thought, this isn't, like I knew that eventually I wanted to have a family, and I thought this isn't the life I want. So then I made the decision to go and do my MBA. Because I knew the elements of my role that I really liked, but I knew that if I wanted to step into more, at that point it was like more transformation projects and managing a really big team, I knew that I needed probably more breadth in my experience, because my whole career had really been marketing and PR. And the MBA is when I really found and leaned into, the coaching and leadership development side.
Yes. And so as we zoom out on that, from lived experience of having, the senior roles and coming up through the ranks in small consulting agencies as a young graduate, what leadership worked? What leadership, who what were the things that you saw as good leadership that was a positive influence on you? What were the negative things that taught you what not to do? And how did it shape your worldview now on what works in business, what doesn't, and how much of your heart and soul are you actually prepared to give to a big corporate world now? Yeah.
If I think back to the really good leadership, it was it was kind and nurturing, and they're actually values that at the time in my career were seen as soft and weak, but it was those leaders that did empower you, and you have to earn the trust, and I do believe that. But feeling like I had the freedom to experiment and be creative, and not such that strong hierarchy where you can't actually flourish, beyond these are your set tasks and you must get them done, and where the only kind of measure of success is how productive you are, which because my role is highly organized and deadlines every day, multiple competing priorities, that is a really important skill of the job, but so is strategic thinking and problem solving. So I think those leaders that empowered and trusted you to go beyond maybe the realm of your title. And I worked in Singapore for a month or so, and I was really struck at their leadership style and just the way that their system ran, in that, for example, the junior member of staff could never leave the office until the senior members of staff left. And I think they had quite an American approach to work, in that it was all about work. It was incredibly long hours, and it was, through to everything from you're having a creative brainstorm, and it's meant to be a creative brainstorm, and again, you don't speak until the leaders have spoken. There were all these kind of etiquettes, and it was just so limiting. I just couldn't believe it compared to my experience in the UK and Australia. But yeah, I had some really, it's difficult, with the couple of really, really tricky leaders I had, particularly in my first agency, who were, I would say, bullying and would just pile on the pressure, and definitely those people who they had the pressure on, so their only way of handling that was just to pile more pressure. And some leaders who were absolutely perfectionists, and I'm already kind of verging into that territory. So when you have a leader, demanding everything is perfect, it kind of just probably fuels that more. And those leaders were really tricky. And I certainly decided I don't want to be a leader like that. But then I probably learnt a lot from them as well. So that it wasn't, I don't think it was black and white. But I look back now and I think, I don't think you could get away with that. That was very toxic. And but there's still good qualities I hope that I learned from them, and it certainly made me a lot better at my job. But then it did lead to the burnout and the exhaustion, and I think it was unnecessary as well. So I don't look back at those leaders and think, oh, I can't believe I stayed working under you for so long. But I wouldn't put up with that now. And then my roles have always had a lot of, stakeholder engagement and liaison, and I still see so many examples of really great leadership qualities and very, very poor. And I'm not shocked anymore when I'm consulting a C-suite, and some of the people in the C-suite they still haven't learned some of these really important leadership lessons, and they probably never will. And
find that knowing what you know now and the journey that you've gone in to build your skill set up. So you realize that there was sort of a bit of a flaw or a gap in your skill base. You went and did your MBA. You became more aware. You said about the burnout looking back with time. Do you think that now when you look back at that experience, that when did the point where it's like, oh, this is burnout, where you actually identified that?
Oh, too late. And, it's not like my partner at the time wasn't saying like, hey, what's going on here? But it was always when I'd made the decision. So it would often be like when I'd be like, okay, I'm going to leave because I'm burnt out. And I hadn't had those honest conversations. And, with the type of environment I was working in, they will just keep take, and reward you through like bonuses and lovely massages. But it was the time drain, I think. So yeah, it took me a long time to be more self-aware about that and actually put the right steps in place to avoid that, because that's not good for anybody. And yeah.
This is one of your strengths, right? There's a lot of things I admire on your journey, and you've learned, in many ways, you've learned to prioritize your personal power rather than genuflecting to positional hierarchical power all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm intrigued. You've been able to keep a foot in both camps. You've stayed valued and sought after in hierarchical senior corporate worlds, but at the same time, you've walked your own path with great dignity and grace, being true to your own spirit. You've nurtured your human spirit, right? And I'm struck by the example you were just sharing. It seems to me, Kat, you were making shifts that were wise and appropriate, but it was always some external pressures forced me to the tipping point, and I better do something about it, right? Hence the elegant name of the Shift on Purpose podcast. Seems in more recent times, you and other high caliber leaders are making conscious shifts on purpose rather than, I'll wait till the crisis or the chaos and then have to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can honestly reflect and say that is, like, I do have a lot more control over my time now. And, even deciding to move from Sydney to the Gold Coast, which like arguably is not a great place for me to be for my career. No. And that was really a decision to start, when we were starting our family. And like, I always think, I heard this great analogy the other day, that you have, 4 stovetops, and this is oversimplifying it, but you have your family, you have your friends, you have your health, and you have your work, and they can't all be dialed up to the maximum. And that's why I think, yes, I do strive to achieve balance and what that means to me, but I think it can just be another stick to kind of knock women with sometimes. And I think you can't, and this is again something I had to learn, you can't have them all dialed up and expect that everything is going to flow just as you want. So I have turned the dial down on my career while still being able to have, use my skills and feel very satisfied. And again, I've been quite lucky in where I've landed with that. But these days I'm incredibly clear on where my values are and what the priorities are. And this is in this particular season of life, and that can shift and change. But, at the moment, my family is the number one. So I don't work full time anymore. And the book writing only happens when, that there is the time that doesn't take me away from the kids. Probably now what I've got to focus on is putting me a little bit more, first. I think many mums will come last, particularly in the early years, and that's okay. But there's also a bit of a sacrifice that comes with that, and you've got to look after yourself to look after your family as well.
So I just want to look at your career too. Communications is a pretty broad role, and you said about PR specifically. But just in London, I want to get a concept of where that corporate journey went. What sort of clients were you working with? And there's also this big gap between, how did we get from London back to Australia, but of all places, Sydney?
Yeah, sure. So I was working for a PR agency first 4 years called Golan Harris, and we represented mainly FMCG, which is fast moving consumer goods clients. So I worked in the consumer team. So we had a corporate team, we had a healthcare team. It's a huge agency. But during that time, my main client was Unilever. So they had like Magnum ice cream on Cornetto and Dove. So I was involved in the Dove Real Beauty campaign. And then we used to do some like corporate work in the consumer team with Unilever, with some of their programs like the Rainforest Alliance, which was about helping, the cocoa farmers in Ecuador and places like that. So that was very broad. And then I worked for a travel company called Expedia, which was very big in the UK. I think it still is. Which was basically a website you went to book your travel.
So that's an interesting, because you like there's more established sort of brands, and then there's this like internet startup really that went to massive growth. And
so for that client, I was on the press office. So that was dealing with media inquiries and organising, I guess, journalists for Mills, which is sort of travel experiences. But then I was also representing like whiskey brands. And so, at any one time, you'd probably have 5 to 6 clients. And then there was always new business happening. So, my whole career has been about juggling the priorities of clients, and to the client, what they need done is the most important. So yes, and then I went to another agency after Golan called Lexus, which was a really big agency in the UK, and I predominantly worked on Coca-Cola, and that was across the Coke brand. So I was predominantly on Diet Coke, which was huge in the UK, and it was, very creative work. So it was doing partnerships with, music stars and sponsoring huge music events. But then I also did the issues management. So at the time, Jamie Oliver and other key figureheads were going really hard at Coke as, the leader on sugar, and sugar was a huge debate. Well, not really a debate. The facts were there. And, Coke was doing some really genuinely good work in that space. But at the end of the day, they're Coca-Cola. So I think if you work for any big company, nearly any big company, you see the really positive sides, and then you see the sides that don't sit well with you. And I think I would feel that probably with most organizations where I get a job at. So say if I worked for a Google or a Facebook, and when I moved back to Australia and eventually ended up at News Corp, I didn't go there because it aligned with my political beliefs. I went there more for the role, and it was a role in the digital team. So it was part of News Corp Australia, but almost like an agency that had been set up within it. And it was to manage a big team and to try and, I guess, transform that team into what was operating a bit like a call center into more of a client service function.
It was a big brief.
It was a big brief, and I think my MBA kind of got me there, and it was really about turning that very, very bespoke agency experience where everything is developed completely tailored for the client. How can we do that at scale? Because the agency I was working at within News Corp, we had, each account manager had 60 clients, which was a huge thing to wrap up my head around, or 40 to 60 clients. Whereas I'd come from a background where you had sort of 5 or so. And it was, how can we achieve that excellence at scale? And that's when I really got into, I guess, learning more about technology and automation. And my boss at the time that was his wheelhouse. He was fantastic at that. And they really needed my comms skills to manage all of the different internal stakeholders at News Corp and help the team learn client service skills beyond kind of that customer service.
And again, one of the things I really value about your journey and the kind of broad brush view I have of it, I really don't want to pretend I can understand the complexities from all your achievements, but I do recognise you've held strongly to a desire to nurture the human spirit, your own, obviously, and the people you connected with, say, in those work roles. In organisations that traditionally do the opposite, there was a strong, ruthless, crush, destroy, performance outcome, hard-driven capacity, expectation on you and many of the team continuously, right? So, if I think about all your roles and where you're at this stage of your life, and you gave a beautiful example of you can't have the 4 stove points simmering perfectly at the same time, yet you have managed to stay fairly true to nurturing the human spirit for yourself and your work colleagues in virtually all of those roles, despite currently being a consultant, a mum, a wife, a children's book author, a creative in a general sense. What's the insights you'd say about that? Because a lot of us can't do it as well as you have, my friend. Stay true to our inner knowing, our soul, our purpose. Manage all of those complex roles that I just listed. There's probably a few more you're doing I don't even realise. What's your learning? How have you done that?
I don't know. I mean, I think I still definitely get overwhelmed, and I don't think everything comes, easily. I think I'm probably very driven, and it's probably not, my personal drive probably isn't the same as many other people's, and that it's not about necessarily, making the most money or having the highest title. I guess it's probably more my sense of purpose, and that's really important to me. And I definitely have a sense of purpose with motherhood, but I've always needed more than that. So I think there's a lot of just personal drive and ambition there, and most of that is healthy. Sometimes I will get caught up comparing myself to others, and I think I naturally will tend to think I need to do more, which is probably why I am quite good at client service, because I'd always go above and beyond. But yeah, I think it is just having a really strong core value set, and going back to what is important to you, what motivates you. I like to show up at work and be the same person consistently. I've had really inconsistent leaders and found that really challenging. So I do bring my whole self to work, and I encourage my team to as well. I do encourage my team to be vulnerable and honest about what's happening. And I think that is an important part of running a high performing team. If you don't have that psychological safety, you're never going to probably get beyond just a transaction. Yeah. And I'm fascinated by that. I love the psychology of that and learning about that. And it does work when you put it into action and you stop and you actually get to know your team and what makes them tick and what their working styles are, and you invest that time up front, and I think it pays dividends. So yeah, I think that you can't do it all on your own. And I think me and my husband, he's a wonderful guy, and we're very, very, we are the modern kind of family, in that I think there is true equity in our relationship, and we are kind of 50-50. And, we both invest in our careers and our family, and that enables me to kind of maintain the level of work and get that satisfaction while still prioritizing the kids, and he does the same. So we both work part-time. And it is hard. It has been really hard because everything gets thrown off if a kid gets sick, and kids, they're on a different agenda, and you have to, and that's been the most kind of humbling thing, becoming a mom and having to really look at what is productivity as a mom. It's not, I came from this really high powered corporate world where success was, reaching your KPIs and ticking 100 things off your list and going at 100 miles and never stopping, and then to having this baby at home. And I had to completely reframe that, and with the help of my partner, who is much better at just going with that, and realizing that success was breastfeeding 10 times a day, how many ever times she needed, and just supporting her, and being content and sleeping when she needed to, and just really slowing down, which
the slowing down, isn't it? So
the choice to have children, though, when you're on that corporate, rocket, you and especially with everything you learnt, and you're now this leader of a team, and you're encouraging the futures of younger people coming through and seeing their successes and encouraging that. I mean, from my own coaching role, I see that a lot of women get caught up in that, and it's almost like they're feeling like they left it too late for kids. Yeah. Was kids always there through this corporate journey? Was that always the goal? And what did that conversation look like with your husband?
That's
Yeah, it was 100% always there. I never wanted to be a young mum. I really wanted to have my career and to travel. And I guess, you know, I can look back and be like, I was able to be very selfish for a time, but I always wanted that. Yeah, there was a real yearning there. Not that I had much exposure to kids. Like I loved kids, but, and, you know, part of me had wanted to go into teaching, and I still think I would have enjoyed that. But yeah, I always knew. So even though in those years I devoted like all of my hours to work, it was never satisfying enough that I thought this is what I could do forever. And I think I always had that hindsight of like, I don't want to grow old. And for me personally, look back and be like, why didn't I do that? So yes, it was very, very important to me. And you know, when I found myself single all of a sudden at 29, there was a great sense of worry of, am I going to meet that person? So that's when on the stovetop I really dialed up, I've got to meet somebody. Obviously after time and having that time on my own, which was also very valuable. But that was a very much a key criteria in finding a partner, because I ideally wanted to do that with somebody.
And you met your husband in Sydney?
Yes, I did. Okay. Yeah.
And so Sydney is, you were both working in the CBD, were you? Or?
He's a physiotherapist and he kind of drives around a lot. But yes, we met in Surrey Hills and we were both living centrally. And yeah.
So, I'm just mindful, Paul, we're kind of winding up towards the end of our time. We're introducing a tradition where we love to ask our wise guests, and I use the word wise purposefully, right? You're modelling and have done in the times I've had the pleasure of hanging out with you, knowledge and experience, which a lot of us have, but you've taken it to the next level, integrated into wisdom and deep reflection, right? So from your wisdom, which is such an important part of leadership, if you had to give your younger self some guidance and reflection, so I'm going to ask you a two-step question. Knowing what you know now and drawing on all the wisdom and magnificence of where your life is positioned now, what would you be saying to your younger self 10 years ago? Yeah, the 10 years previous version of you. And intriguingly, what would your wise self say to the younger version of you 20 years ago that you now know that perhaps 10 years ago you didn't, and what didn't you know 20 years ago that really mattered?
Yeah. Well, 10 years ago, I was sort of 30 and single and in a job that maybe I knew wasn't going to be lasting. And, but I'd started my MBA. So that was really good and like grounding me, but probably just that it will all work out. So, you know, those early 30s to mid 30s were like huge transformation period for me, and meeting Andy and, kind of taking my career to new heights, and then eventually moving to the Gold Coast 5 years ago. So probably like, it's okay, Kat, chill. Because I would always have the dialogue in my head. And, you know, when I'm driven, you know, a lot of the time when you have a goal at work, if you work hard enough, you can reach it. Whereas like meeting the right partner, you can put all the time in, you can go on all the dates, and there's got to be a certain amount of luck and the timing's got to be right. Like it's, but I did kind of treat that like a project. Like you have to keep this up because it's a numbers game, and you've got to, if this is what you want, you need to put the time and energy. But probably just telling myself it's all going to be okay, and you probably have more time than you think. My dad was a fertility specialist, so he was always like, your biological age isn't the same as how old you feel.
I think Dad's got a lot of wisdom too. That's lovely, you know?
Yeah, he definitely did. And if I think back to my 20-year-old self, it was, like I don't regret working so hard at all, like because I probably wouldn't. I think you have to put, 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. And I loved it. And I have so many positive experiences from that time. So I don't really have regrets, but I probably like worried too much. And I probably worried too much about things that were outside like of my sphere of control. So I think I'm better now at trying to focus on what is controllable. And, but if I think back to kind of all my weaknesses or continual areas of development, I think they're the same now. Like I have a lot more wisdom and self-awareness But if I have a tricky period, like I do revert back, like, you know, it is probably who I am, and I just have better tools and awareness now to manage it. And, you know, I think that's probably the drive to work can also be a failure sometimes, you know. So, yeah, I'd probably just say worry less, it'll be okay. And
it's beautiful.
yeah.
And it's just such a pleasure to see the world through your eyes. And you're almost describing the spiral of insight and perspectives I see in so many of our coaching clients. Challenges are still there, but you're seeing with different level of conscious awareness and different level of perspective. And just stay on your beautiful, wise path.
Thank you.
And seeing the world through your eyes has taught me a lot, and I'm certain the listeners have got a lot of value out of this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Conscious points of time where you said, oh, I'm going to make this shift, and you went and did it despite knowing what was laying ahead. You know, sometimes the path appears when you first take those steps, and it sounds like that's what's.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.